Title: The Labyrinth of Time and the Key of Destiny. In a world where time is more than just a passing moment, a legend whispers of a labyrinth, hidden deep in the folds of existence. This labyrinth is not bound by the limits of space, for it spans the threads of time itself, past, present, and future intertwine within its walls. A young traveler named Kale has heard the stories of this place, where the fate of the world can be altered with a single choice. Determined to unlock the mysteries of time, Kale sets forth on a journey to find the entrance to this labyrinth, and, with it, the key of Destiny, an artifact said to control the very fabric of time. Kale stood before an ancient door, worn and covered in ivy, its surface etched with strange symbols. The air was thick with the scent of earth and forgotten memories, as though the door itself had been waiting for someone to come. His heart raced, the weight of the journey ahead pressing heavily on his chest. As Kale stepped closer, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a vast expanse that seemed to stretch forever, yet was confined within the edges of his vision. The labyrinth was not a place one could simply walk through, it was a test, a trial of one's understanding of time and fate. A voice echoed from the shadows, soft but unmistakable. To enter, you must first understand the essence of time. Choose wisely, for the path you take will shape your future. Welcome to the labyrinth of time. The door closed behind him, and Kale found himself standing at the threshold of a new beginning. Deep within the labyrinth, Kale encountered the first challenge, a towering figure clad in silver armor, standing as a sentinel to guard the next passage. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but its presence was undeniable, a force that seemed to command respect and fear alike. "Who dares to enter the heart of time?" the guardian asked, its voice echoing like a distant thunderclap. Kale stepped forward, determination in his eyes. "I seek the key of destiny. I wish to change the course of time itself." The guardian's eyes glowed faintly, as if it could see beyond Kale's words, into the depths of his heart. "Then you must first prove your worth. Time is not a mere thing to be controlled. It is a force that shapes all existence. You will face your past, your present, and your future. Only then will you be worthy." With a sweeping gesture, the guardian vanished, and Kale was plunged into darkness. The air around him shimmered, and suddenly, he was standing in the middle of a field, his childhood home in the distance. Kale blinked, disoriented. He recognized this place. It was the village he had left behind years ago, a place where memories of happiness and sorrow intertwined. He watched himself as a young child, running through the fields, laughing with friends. But then, he saw the shadowish future self, standing in silence, distant and sorrowful. "Why did you leave?" a voice whispered from the shadows. "What did you sacrifice to come here?" Kale turned to face his younger self. I had to leave. There was something calling me, something greater than myself. But at what cost?" the child asked, eyes full of innocent curiosity. Kale paused, the weight of his decision bearing down on him. The voice continued, "You cannot change the past. You must learn to accept it, or it will haunt you forever." The vision shifted, and the past began to fade. The labyrinth continued to test him, pushing him further into his journey. The labyrinth stretched on, shifting and twisting like the very fabric of time itself. Kale stumbled, weary from his trials. But before him, a shimmering door appeared, leading into a vast expanse of light. As he crossed the threshold, he was suddenly standing on a battlefield, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and the cries of warriors. He saw himself, an older version, holding a sword, standing at the front of an army. "Do you see it?" a voice echoed around him. "The path you are destined to take. The world you will create." Kale's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the decision that awaited him. On one hand, he saw the destruction of worth, ruin of everything he held dear. On the other, a vision of peace, but one that came with its own sacrifices. You must choose, the voice whispered. The future is not fixed, but every choice you make ripples through time. Cale stood frozen, unsure of which path to take. Could he truly change the future, or was everything predetermined? The labyrinth had shown him both sides, the cost of war and the price of peace. At last, Cale reached the heart of the labyrinth. Before him lay a pedestal, and on it rested the key of destiny. It glowed with an ethereal light, pulsing with the power to shape the future. The guardian of time appeared once again, standing silently at Cale's side. You have seen the past, the present, and the future. Now, the choice is yours, the guardian said. Will you use the key to change time? Or will you leave it as it is, allowing fate to unfold naturally? Cale reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the key. He could feel its power, its connection to everything that had ever been, and everything that ever would be. The future stretched out before him, uncertain yet full of possibility. I choose to shape my own path, Cale said, his voice steady, resolute. The moment his hand closed around the key, the labyrinth began to fade, the walls crumbling into nothingness. The future was his to create, and with the key of destiny in his grasp, Cale stepped forward into the unknown. Cale stood at the edge of a new world, the key of destiny in hand. The labyrinth was behind him, but its lessons would stay with him forever. Time was not something to be controlled, but something to be understood, woven with the threads of choices and consequences. As Cale walked into the future, he knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer afraid. For he held the key, and with it, the power to shape his own destiny. As Cale ventured deeper into the world beyond the labyrinth, the weight of his decision began to settle on his shoulders. The key of destiny, once glowing with radiant power, now felt heavy in his hand, a constant reminder of the responsibility he carried. He had chosen to forge his own path, but what did that truly mean? Could he reshape the world without consequence? The wind whispered through the trees, as if time itself were speaking to him, reminding him that each choice, no matter how small, could create ripples that stretched across the very fabric of reality. The echoes of the past and the visions of the future were never truly gone, they remained, entangled in his thoughts, guiding him, haunting him. Cale walked onward, unsure of what awaited him, but certain that the journey was far from over. The labyrinth may have been left behind, but the path ahead was full of unknowns. Every step he took seemed to lead him closer to understanding, to the deeper mysteries of time and fate. What would become of the choices he made? How would the future unfold? Days turned into weeks as Cale traveled through strange lands and encountered new faces, each with their own stories, struggles, and desires. Some had heard of the labyrinth of time and the key of destiny, and spoke of it with reverence, while others dismissed it as nothing more than a myth. Yet, Cale knew that the journey had changed him. The power to shape his own destiny was both a blessing and a curse. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Cale found himself at the edge of a great river, its waters reflecting the fading light of day. Sitting by the water, he let out a deep breath, contemplating the future that lay before him. I could change everything, Cale whispered to himself, his thoughts swirling like the river's current. But what if I destroy something in the process? The voice of the guardian echoed in his mind, as though speaking from the labyrinth itself. You cannot undo the past, but you can learn from it. Your choices define you, Cale. You are the weaver of your own fate. With those words, Cale realized that the journey was not just about shaping the future, but about understanding the delicate balance between change and preservation. The past was not something to be erased or forgotten, it was a part of the greater tapestry of existence. The road ahead led Kale to a great crossroads, a place where countless paths stretched out in all directions, each one a possible future. He stood at the center, the key of destiny glowing faintly in his hand, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of the choices before him. A figure appeared before him, cloaked in the shadows of the crossroads. It was not the guardian, but a traveler, a mysterious figure whose face was obscured by a hood. The figure spoke, their voice calm yet filled with an ancient wisdom. "You have come far, Kale," the traveler said. "But the journey is far from over. The key of destiny has not only given you power, but also the knowledge of what lies ahead. You must now decide, will you walk the path of light, or embrace the shadows of fate?" Kale stood still, the question echoing in his mind. He could see both paths before him, light that promised hope, and the shadows that whispered of power and secrets long hidden. Both paths were tempting, but neither was without its price. "You have already chosen," the traveler continued. "But every choice you make will leave its mark. The question is not what you choose, but how you live with your choice." With that, the traveler vanished, leaving Kale to ponder his next step. The crossroads were no longer just a place to make decisions, they had become a symbol of everything he had learned in the labyrinth. The power to shape destiny was not about controlling everything, but understanding the consequences of each action. As Kale moved forward, he began to realize that the key of destiny was more than just an objective, it was a part of him. The journey he had taken through the labyrinth had been a test, not only of his resolve but of his understanding of time itself. The key was not a weapon to be wielded, but a guide to help him navigate the ever-shifting currents of fate. One night, as Kale sat beneath the stars, the key of destiny began to glow once more, brighter than ever before. He felt its power, its connection to the very fabric of the universe. And he understood that it was time to return the key to where it belonged, not in the hands of one individual, but in the care of the world itself. In a moment of clarity, Kale knew what he must do. He had to return the key to the labyrinth, to where it all began. The labyrinth was not a prison, but a sanctuary, a place where time itself could be respected and understood. The key was not a tool to change fate, but a reminder that fate itself was not something to be controlled, it was something to be embraced. With the key of destiny now returned to its rightful place, Kale felt a deep sense of peace. The labyrinth had taught him that time was not linear, it was a circle, ever flowing, ever changing. The future was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced with open arms. As Kale walked away from the labyrinth, he knew that his journey was far from over. The world was vast, full of mysteries yet to be uncovered. But the lessons he had learned, the lessons of time, fate, and choice, would guide him for the rest of his days. And so, the labyrinth of time remained, a place where those brave enough to seek the truth could find it. For Kale, the key of destiny was no longer just a symbol of power, it was a reminder that the greatest journey of all is the one we take within ourselves. Years passed since Kale returned the key of destiny to the labyrinth. The world around him had changed in subtle ways, and yet, there was an undeniable sense of stillness that remained. As time continued to move forward, Kale felt the weight of his choices in every moment. He had embraced the understanding that the journey was not about trying to control time, but rather accepting its flow. Still, in his heart, a question lingered, the question of his purpose. One evening, while meditating beneath a great oak tree, Kale felt a strange pull in the air, as if the winds were urging him to return to the labyrinth. He had come to realize that the labyrinth was not just a place in the world, but a place in his mind, a reflection of the constant passage of time, ever shifting, ever evolving. The winds whispered his name. Kale. Startled, he stood and turned, looking into the distance. The horizon seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light, as if the very fabric of reality was bending. Without hesitation, Kale began his journey back to the labyrinth. The road was long and full of unknowns, but he no longer feared the uncertainty. Time itself had become his guide. As Kale approached the entrance of the labyrinth, the familiar stone walls loomed before him, ancient yet timeless. He stepped inside, the echoes of his footsteps reverberating through the corridors. The air within the labyrinth was thick with memories, visions of all those who had entered before him. Each seeking answers, seeking a way to shape their own destinies. Kale had returned not to seek the key of destiny, but to confront the final piece of his understanding, the truth behind the labyrinth itself. The key was not simply an object, it was a reflection of the human heart, of the choices one made, and the paths that were taken or forsaken. The labyrinth was both a prison and a sanctuary, a place where time and fate were intertwined. In the heart of the labyrinth, Kale found a new presence, a figure cloaked in light, standing at the center of the chamber. It was neither a guardian nor an enemy, but something in between, a manifestation of time itself. "You have returned," the figure said, its voice a melody that seemed to resonate with the very essence of existence. "And now, you are ready to understand the final truth." Kale stepped forward, his heart pounding. "What truth? I thought I had already learned everything." The figure smiled softly, the light surrounding it flickering like a flame. "You have learned much, Kale. But there is one thing you must understand: the labyrinth is not just a test of choice, but a test of self. The key of destiny was never about changing the future. It was about understanding the power within you to live with your choices, to shape your own story without fear of what lies ahead." Kale's breath caught in his throat. "Are you saying that I had the power all along?" The figure nodded. "Yes. The labyrinth was a journey through your own heart. The key was always within you. It was never an object, but a reflection of the potential that lies within every soul. Time may flow, and fate may shift, but the one constant is your ability to choose how you respond to it." The figure extended a hand, offering Kale the choice he had sought. "Now, you must decide. Will you continue your journey, knowing that time and fate are not for you to control? Or will you embrace the final step and live fully in the present, no longer bound by the weight of the past or the uncertainty of the future?" Kale stood at the threshold, the crossroads of his journey once again before him. But this time, there was no need to choose a path. The answer was clear. He had always been free to live in the present, to embrace each moment as it came, with all its joys and sorrows. With a quiet smile, Kale stepped forward and took the figure's hand, feeling a rush of warmth and understanding wash over him. "I choose to live," he said softly. "Not to control, but to embrace." The labyrinth's walls shimmered, then slowly faded into light, and Kale was standing once more beneath the stars, the vast world stretching out before him. The key of destiny had returned to its rightful place, but Kale knew now that he was not defined by fate or time. He was defined by his choices and the freedom to live each one fully. As Kale wandered through the world, he met many who sought the answers he once sought. Some asked about the labyrinth, the key, and the mysteries of fate. But Kale had no answers to give them. Instead, he offered them what he had learned, that the journey of life was not about finding a key, or even a destination. It was about understanding the importance of each moment, each decision, and the ability to walk freely along the winding road of destiny. The labyrinth of time remained, a place for those who sought to understand their own paths. But Kale knew that the greatest journey was not to be found in the labyrinth, it was to be found in the world outside, in the hearts of those who, like him, sought their own truths. And so, Kale continued his journey, never bound by the past, never fearful of the future. For he had discovered the greatest truth of all, that destiny was not something to be found or shaped, it was something to be lived. As Cale continued his journey, his heart and mind were filled with the lessons he had learned in the labyrinth. He had seen the power of his choices and how they shaped not only his own path but the world around him. Yet, despite this newfound understanding, there were times when doubt would creep in. Late one evening, as Cale crossed a vast plain under a darkened sky, he heard whispers in the wind. At first, they seemed like fleeting thoughts, fragments of voices from the past, lost in the winds of time. But as he walked further, the voices grew louder, more distinct. It was as if the echoes of everyone who had ever faced the labyrinth were calling out to him, questioning him. "Do you truly believe you are free?" one voice asked, filled with doubt. "Can anyone truly escape the web of fate?" another asked, a hint of despair in their tone. Cale stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. The voices seemed to come from all directions, each one pressing against him, demanding answers. It was as if the labyrinth itself had followed him, its weight upon his shoulders once again. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, reaching inward for the peace he had found before. "I choose to live," he whispered, repeating the words that had become his mantra. The voices fell silent. For a long moment, there was nothing but stillness. Cale stood in the quiet, feeling a calm wash over him. "Your choices are your own," the wind whispered back, softer now. "You are free." With that, the whispers faded, and Cale felt lighter than he ever had before. He was no longer bound by the ghosts of the past or the uncertainties of the future. He had learned that the past only lived in the stories we told ourselves, and the future was always shifting, never set in stone. As Cale continued his travels, he came across a great stone gate, towering over him like an ancient relic. Its surface was covered in intricate symbols he had seen before, carved into the walls of the labyrinth. It was the Gate of Choices, a place where those who sought answers could test their resolve. The gate creaked open slowly as Cale approached, inviting him to enter. He hesitated, remembering the trials he had faced in the labyrinth, the choices that had shaped his life. This gate, he knew, was not merely a passage, it was a reminder that choices continued to define him, even after the labyrinth was behind him. With a steady breath, Cale stepped through the gate and found himself standing in a vast chamber. At the center of the room was a pedestal, upon which lay a single object, a crystal orb, glowing faintly with an inner light. As he approached it, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You have come to seek answers," the voice said, warm yet distant. "But the truth you seek lies within you. Will you choose to accept it?" Cale gazed at the orb, feeling its pull. He could feel the weight of his past decisions, of everything that had led him to this moment. The orb shimmered with the promise of deeper understanding, but Cale knew now that true wisdom did not lie in the object before him, it lay in the choices he had already made and would continue to make. "I choose to live fully," Cale said firmly, his voice clear and strong. "I choose to walk my path without fear." As his words resonated through the chamber, the orb pulsed brightly, then faded into nothingness. The chamber, too, began to dissolve, fading away into the vast, open landscape beyond. The Gate of Choices had vanished, leaving Cale once again standing in the world that awaited him. Cale's journey continued, but with each passing day, he grew more attuned to the rhythms of the world around him. Time, once an enigma he sought to control, had become a companion. He could feel the ebb and flow of the seasons, the rise and fall of the sun, and the turning of the stars above. His awareness of the world's delicate balance deepened, and he came to understand that life was not something to be rushed, nor something to be controlled. It was to be experienced fully, each moment as it came. One evening, as Kale gazed up at the stars, he noticed a single constellation, one that had always been hidden behind the clouds, never visible from his homeland. But tonight, it shone brightly, clear and perfect in the sky. He smiled, realizing that the constellation was the very symbol of the labyrinth, the winding path, the maze, the journey of choices. It was as if the universe itself was speaking to him, showing him that every part of his journey had led him to this moment. The stars above were a reflection of his journey, both the light and the shadows he had encountered, all part of the same celestial design. In that moment, Kale understood that the labyrinth had not been a place to escape from, but a part of the world itself, a reflection of the constant ebb and flow of time and choices. The key of destiny was not a singular object to be used or hoarded, but a metaphor for the power within each of us to choose, to live, and to embrace the beauty of the journey. Years passed, and Kale's travels took him to new lands, places where the stories of the labyrinth were whispered, but no longer feared. He met others along the way, some who sought to change their fates, others who had already accepted their own. In every encounter, Kale shared the wisdom he had gained from his journey. It is not the choices themselves that define us, Kale would say. It is the way we live with those choices that shapes who we are. And so, the legacy of the labyrinth lived on, not in the walls of an ancient maze, but in the hearts of those who had learned to embrace the passage of time, to live in the present, and to walk their own paths with courage and clarity. As Kale looked out across the horizon one final time, he knew that the labyrinth had been only the beginning. Time, fate, and destiny would continue to unfold, but Kale was no longer a mere traveler. He was the keeper of his own path, the master of his own story. And with that, he walked onward, into the vast unknown, content in the knowledge that the greatest journey was not one that ended but one that continued, ever onward, forever unfolding. One quiet morning, as Kale stood by a crystal-clear river, the waters reflecting the early light of dawn, a strange sensation crept over him. He felt as if the very air around him was charged with a mysterious energy, as though something was calling him from the depths of time itself. As the sun's rays touched the river's surface, a ripple formed in the water. The reflection of the sky wavered, and from within the ripples, a voice emerged, soft yet powerful, like a whisper carried across the ages. "Kale, you have walked far and learned much," the voice said, its tone both familiar and strange. "But your journey is not yet complete. There is more you must discover, an understanding that only the future can reveal." Kale stood still, listening closely. "Who are you?" he asked, though the answer seemed to lie just beyond his grasp. The voice answered with warmth. "I am not a being from the past or the future. I am the voice of all that is yet to come. You, Kale, have shaped your path, but there is one final challenge, a final choice that will reveal the true meaning of your existence." Kale's heart quickened. He had always believed that the greatest challenge was behind him, that the labyrinth had already revealed its secrets. But now, it seemed, the journey was far from over. "What must I do?" Kale asked, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. The voice responded, "Look to the horizon, Kale. You must embrace the unknown. You must walk forward into the future, not with fear, but with trust. The future is not a place to be feared or controlled. It is a canvas untouched, unexplored. Only by embracing it fully can you unlock the final mystery of time." Kale gazed at the river's surface, the water rippling softly under the light of the rising sun. For the first time in his life, he felt truly at peace with the uncertainty of the future. The labyrinth had taught him that time was fluid, and now he understood that he did not need to control it to find fulfillment. Instead, he simply needed to live, to walk forward with courage, and to trust in the unfolding of life itself. Years passed, and Kale traveled through countless lands, sharing his wisdom with those who crossed his path. He had seen many souls who were still bound by the chains of fate, struggling to break free from the past and fearful of the future. To them, Kale spoke of the labyrinth, of the key of destiny, and of the lessons he had learned. He taught them not to seek control over time, but to live in harmony with it. To embrace the flow of life, understanding that every moment was a gift, even the moments of struggle and doubt. He spoke of the labyrinth not as a place to escape from, but as a mirror, a reflection of the inner journey that each person must make. In every place he visited, Kale left behind more than just his teachings. He left behind a sense of hope, a sense that the future was not something to be feared, but something to be welcomed. He encouraged others to make their own choices and walk their own paths. Understanding that the power to shape one's destiny was not in avoiding challenges, but in how one faced them. As Kale walked through a bustling village one day, he saw a group of children gathered around a storyteller. The storyteller spoke of an ancient labyrinth, a place where time and fate collided. The children were captivated by the tale, their eyes wide with wonder. Kale stopped and listened, a smile playing on his lips. He realized that the labyrinth would always live on in stories, in the hearts of those who had come before, and in those who would come after. It was a symbol of the eternal dance between choice and consequence, between the past and the future. Remember, the storyteller said, turning to the children, the labyrinth is not just a place of darkness or fear. It is a place of discovery, a place where you find the key to your own heart, the key to your destiny. Kale watched as the children nodded, their eyes alight with understanding. The legacy of the labyrinth lived on, not in the walls of a maze, but in the hearts of all who sought to understand their own lives. Years passed, and Kale's journeys took him to the farthest corners of the world. But as time wore on, he began to feel a pull not to a specific place, but to a deeper understanding of himself. One evening, as Kale sat beside a fire, the stars twinkling above him, he reflected on his life. He had seen many things, met many people, and experienced the ebb and flow of time in ways he could never have imagined. But he had also learned that there was one thing that could never be fully understood: the mystery of existence itself. In the quiet of the night, Kale understood that he had never been searching for the perfect answer, the final truth. He had been searching for meaning, for connection, for a way to live fully in a world that was constantly changing. And in his heart, he realized that the journey itself was the answer. As Kale looked out at the horizon, he smiled, content. The road had no end, for it was not a destination that mattered. What mattered was the experience, the choices, the challenges, the moments of peace and of struggle. Time would continue to pass, and fate would continue to unfold, but Kale was no longer concerned with controlling it. He had become one with the flow of time, and in doing so, he had unlocked the greatest mystery of all: the ability to live fully, in every moment. Kale's story became a legend, a tale passed down through generations. It was said that he continued his travels, always seeking new horizons, always embracing the unknown. Some believed that he had found the secret to immortality, while others thought that he had simply become one with the world around him. But in truth, Kale had never sought immortality. He had never sought to control fate. He had sought only to live, to make choices, and to walk his path with courage and clarity. And in the end, Kale understood that the labyrinth was not a place to be entered or escaped, it was a journey to be lived. A journey that never truly ended, but continued, ever onward, in the hearts of those who chose to walk it. And so, Kale's legacy lived on through the stories, the lessons, and the hearts of those who, like him, understood that time was not something to conquer, but something to embrace. Years passed, and Kale found himself standing once more at the entrance of the labyrinth. It was an unremarkable place, its stone walls worn by time, its corridors darkened with the weight of centuries. The key of destiny hung at his side, its power now a distant echo, its purpose fulfilled. But Cale knew something had changed. He had changed. He had walked the paths of the labyrinth not once, but many times, each journey revealing more about himself, about the world, about the people he met. And now, standing at the entrance once more, Cale understood that the labyrinth was not a place of answers, it was a mirror. A mirror that reflected the deepest truths within one's soul. Cale stepped into the labyrinth once again, not in search of an answer, but in search of understanding. The stone walls loomed high around him, the labyrinth's timelessness pressing against him. The path was no longer unfamiliar, and yet, it was still full of mysteries. This time, Cale did not seek the key. He no longer needed it. He had already found what he needed. As he walked deeper into the labyrinth, memories of his past, adventures began to surface, the friends he had made, the lessons he had learned, the battles he had fought. His heart swelled with gratitude for every moment, both good and bad, because they had all contributed to the person he had become. He reached the center of the labyrinth, the place where the greatest truth was said to be revealed. But instead of a grand revelation or a shining light, Cale found only silence. And in that silence, he understood. The truth was not something to be found in a single moment, nor was it something that could be captured by words. The truth was a living thing, always shifting, always evolving. It was in the choices he made, the relationships he nurtured, and the way he embraced each moment of life. There was no singular answer, there was only the journey, and it was beautiful in its uncertainty. As Cale left the labyrinth behind, he found that the world around him had changed, as it always does. New faces appeared, and old faces faded. The people he met now lived in a world shaped by his teachings, the idea that time was not to be feared, but embraced. He was no longer a solitary wanderer, he was a guide, a beacon of hope for those who struggled with the weight of destiny. He taught others how to find their own paths, how to trust in the flow of time and to live fully in the present. He spoke of the labyrinth as a metaphor, explaining that each person's life was a labyrinth in itself, a series of choices, twists, and turns, all leading to different outcomes. It was not about seeking the perfect path, but about embracing the journey, no matter where it led. Cale became a mentor to many, sharing his wisdom and offering guidance. But he never stayed too long in one place. His heart, like the wind, was always moving, always seeking new experiences. He understood that life was a continuous journey, one that could never be fully defined or understood. It was only to be lived. One day, Cale found himself at a great cliff, overlooking an endless sea. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink. It was a beautiful sight, but it wasn't the view that held his attention. It was the sense of peace that filled him, the deep understanding that this moment, this very moment, was enough. As he stood there, the wind tugging at his cloak, Cale smiled. He had walked the labyrinth and faced the choices of destiny, but the greatest lesson he had learned was that the journey itself was the destination. There was no final step, no ultimate truth to attain. Life was a flow, an endless river that could not be contained, only embraced. Cale continued to wander the lands, sharing his wisdom and helping others find their way. Yet, even as he did so, he felt the pull of something greater, a quiet voice, deep inside his soul, urging him to make one final choice. He had long understood the impermanence of life, but now, as the years stretched before him, he realized that his own journey was nearing its end. He had faced the labyrinth, overcome its challenges, and passed on its lessons. But now, Cale wondered if there was one final decision to make, one last step to take. One night, as he sat beneath a canopy of stars, the wind carrying the scent of distant flowers, Kale felt the weight of time in a way he never had before. He had come so far, but now he wondered if he should let go. Should he continue to travel? Or had his journey already come to its natural end? He closed his eyes, listening to the whisper of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. And in that silence, Kale understood that the final choice was not about where he went, or what he did. It was about letting go of the need to control the journey, to know what would come next. The labyrinth, he realized, was not just a physical place, it was a state of mind. And now, he was free of it. He had learned to live without the constant search for answers, without the need to define his path. He was ready to simply be. As Kale stood to leave the quiet meadow, he felt a deep sense of peace. The world was vast, and his journey had been long. But he had finally come to understand that the end was not an end at all. It was simply another beginning. Kale's story became a legend, passed down through generations. His name was spoken with reverence, not because of the great feats he had accomplished, but because of the wisdom he had shared. He had taught the world that time was not something to conquer, but something to embrace. And though Kale's body grew old and frail, his spirit remained ever present, a part of the world he had come to love so deeply. He had found his place in the world, not by seeking an answer, but by living fully, with trust in the unfolding of each moment. In the end, Kale had found the greatest truth of all, that the labyrinth was not a place, but a journey. And that journey never truly ended, it simply flowed into the next, and the next, and the next. The key of destiny was no longer needed. Kale had unlocked the most powerful secret of all, how to live in harmony with the flow of time, and to find peace in the journey itself. Kale's life had become a quiet testament to the wisdom he had gleaned through his trials in the labyrinth and his search for the key of destiny. Over time, his teachings spread far and wide, reaching the hearts of those who had been lost, those who were searching for meaning in their own lives. In every village, city, and town, people gathered to listen to his words that spoke of patience, of growth, of embracing each fleeting moment. But Kale knew that no matter how far his wisdom traveled, there would always be more to learn. Time, like the labyrinth itself, was vast and infinite. Though Kale had embraced his place in the world, he had never stopped growing. He had learned that every experience, no matter how small, held the potential for new understanding. And so, he continued his journey, no longer as a seeker, but as a guide. He helped others see the labyrinth within themselves, the twists and turns of their inner world, and to find peace in the constant ebb and flow of time. In a quiet meadow, on the edge of a great forest, Kale met a young girl named Alara. She was searching for something, though she didn't know what it was. Her eyes were filled with wonder and curiosity, but there was also an undercurrent of sorrow, a deep yearning for something she couldn't name. Alara had heard stories of Kale, the wise traveler who had walked the labyrinth and learned the secrets of time. She had heard that he could offer answers to those lost in their own search. And so, she found her way to him, hoping to find what she had been seeking for so long. Kale greeted her with a warm smile and invited her to sit beside him in the meadow. They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the wind as it whispered through the trees, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath them. Finally, Alara spoke. "I don't know what I'm looking for," she said. "I've been searching for something, anything that will help me understand my place in this world. I've been told that the answers lie in the labyrinth, but I don't even know where to begin." Kale looked at her with kind eyes. "The labyrinth is not just a place, Alara. It is a journey that each person must walk in their own way. You will not find the answers by searching for them. You must learn to listen to the rhythm of your heart, to the whispers of the world around you." The answers are already inside of you, waiting to be discovered. Alara frowned. But how'd I listen? How'd I hear those whispers when everything around me is so loud? Kale smiled gently. The world may be loud, but silence is always present. It is in the quiet moments, in the stillness, that you will hear the truth of who you are. You must learn to be still, to pause, to allow your heart to speak. Only then will you understand the path that lies before you. Alara took a deep breath, looking out over the meadow. The wind was soft, and the air smelled sweet with the scent of blooming flowers. For the first time, she felt a quiet sense of peace wash over her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she was no longer lost. As Alara continued her journey, guided by Kale's words, she too began to share her newfound wisdom with others. She spoke of the labyrinth within, of the need to listen and trust in the unfolding of time. Slowly, she became a beacon of hope for those who had wandered off their paths, offering guidance with a compassion that only someone who had once been lost could provide. And so, the cycle continued. Kale's teachings spread like ripples in water, touching lives in ways that were often unseen but always profound. Each person who found their way through the labyrinth, each person who learned to trust the passage of time, passed that wisdom forward. They planted seeds of change in others, creating a network of interconnected souls, each learning and growing in their own way. The labyrinth, Kale realized, was not just a metaphor for the individual journey, it was the web of life itself. We are all connected, intertwined in ways that we may never fully understand, but always a part of the larger pattern of existence. The key of destiny had unlocked not a single answer, but the potential for endless growth. As the years passed, Kale grew older. His hair turned silver, his steps slowed, but his heart remained as full of wonder as it had been in his youth. He knew that his time in the physical world was drawing to a close, but he did not fear it. His body may have aged, but his spirit was timeless, and it would continue to live on in the people he had touched. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kale stood at the edge of the meadow where he had once met Alara. He looked out over the landscape, feeling the wind on his face and the warmth of the setting sun on his skin. There was no fear, no sadness, only peace. In the distance, he saw Alara, now a woman, standing at the foot of the same hill where he had once stood. She had become a wise teacher, just as he had, guiding others with the same quiet confidence that he had shown her. And with that sight, Kale knew that his work was complete. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Kale closed his eyes and took a final, deep breath. His heart, full of gratitude and understanding, gave one last beat. And with that, he was at peace. The labyrinth was not just a place in time, it was a journey that lived on forever, passed from one soul to the next, always unfolding, always growing. Kale had found his place within it, and in doing so, had unlocked the greatest mystery of all, that the journey itself was the destination. And so, the story of Kale became a legend, told for generations. The key of destiny had long since passed from hand to hand, but the wisdom it unlocked remained a timeless truth that continued to guide those who sought it. For the labyrinth, like time, was endless. And its secrets, like the stars, would continue to shine forever. Years turned into decades, and the world that Kale had touched continued to evolve. As his story passed into legend, people began to speak of his teachings as more than just wisdom, they became a living truth. An enduring presence in the hearts of those who sought peace and understanding. The labyrinth remained at the center of these stories. Not a physical maze, but a representation of the internal struggles and triumphs that every soul faced on their journey. It was said that those who entered the labyrinth would not find a way out, but rather, find the way within. For in the heart of every person was a labyrinth, filled with fears, desires, and mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Alara, now a woman of great wisdom and power, had become a leader in the movement Kale had begun. She had taught countless others how to see their inner worlds, how to embrace both the light and darkness within, and how to walk the labyrinth with courage, even when the path seemed impossible. In every corner of the world, new teachers had risen, each inspired by Kale's legacy, and each continuing the cycle of growth and enlightenment. Though Kale had passed, his influence had spread far and wide. His lessons had become timeless, just as the labyrinth itself was. Alara often wondered if there was ever a true end to this journey. She had learned from Kale that each step, each turn in the labyrinth, was just a part of something larger. Something greater than any individual could ever comprehend. One evening, as the sky turned golden with the setting sun, Alara found herself standing at the same meadow where she had once met Kale. Her heart felt full, just as it had the first time she had met him. Though many years had passed, she could still hear his voice in the wind, feel his presence in the earth beneath her feet. She had become the teacher now, but she knew that the journey, like the labyrinth, would never end. As the wind rustled the leaves of the trees around her, Alara felt a familiar tug in her heart. It was a sense of longing not for something lost, but for something still ahead, still unfolding. She knew that her own journey was not yet complete, and though she had come so far, she still had much to learn. The world around her shifted in ways she couldn't fully understand, but one thing was certain: time was always moving forward, and with it, the stories of those who walked the labyrinth would continue to evolve. The key of destiny was not a single object or a moment in time, but the understanding that life, in all its complexity and beauty, was a constant unfolding. In the years that followed, Alara became a legend in her own right. The stories of Kale and his teachings were passed down through generations, and her own story became interwoven with his. She, too, became a part of the labyrinth, a piece of its infinite web, forever intertwined with the lives of those she had helped guide. Time went on, and the labyrinth continued to live within the hearts of all who sought its secrets. It was said that the labyrinth had no center, no end, because the journey itself was the destination. Every person who entered would find their own path, their own truths, but in the end, they would all meet at the same place, their own heart. Alara, in her later years, often stood in the same meadow where Kale had passed on. Her hair was touched with silver, and her steps were slower than they had once been, but her heart was still full of wonder. She had come to realize that the labyrinth she had once walked, the path Kale had shown her, was not a destination, it was a way of being. A way of embracing the unknown and finding peace in the midst of it. One day, as she walked through the meadow, she felt a presence at her side. She looked over and saw a young child, no older than she had been when she first met Kale. The child looked up at her with eyes full of curiosity and wonder, just as she had once looked at Kale. "Are you the one who knows the way?" the child asked, their voice filled with a quiet innocence. Alara smiled, her heart swelling with the same warmth Kale's presence had once brought her. "I'm just one of the many who have walked the path," she replied softly. "And like you, I am still learning." The child looked at her, then down at the ground, deep in thought. "Where does the path lead?" they asked. Alara paused, looking out over the vast meadow, the horizon stretching far into the distance. "The path leads to you," she said, "and to everyone you meet along the way. It's not about where it ends, it's about how you walk it. With every step, you uncover more of who you are and how you can help others find their way." The child nodded slowly, their eyes bright with understanding. As they turned to leave, Alara felt the weight of her years, but also the lightness of her heart. The labyrinth, the journey, had not just been hers, it was for everyone who had walked it, and everyone who would. And as she watched the child disappear into the distance, Alara knew that the labyrinth would continue forever, always unfolding. Always inviting those who were ready to walk its winding path. As Alara sat alone that evening, watching the stars begin to emerge in the sky, she reflected on the wisdom Kale had shared with her. She had lived a life full of meaning, of discovery, of connection. The labyrinth had led her to places she could never have imagined, and in the process, she had learned that the key of destiny was not something one could hold in their hand. It was the understanding that the path itself was sacred, that every twist and turn had purpose. The labyrinth was not just a metaphor for life. It was life itself. Alara closed her eyes and breathed in the night air, her heart light and free. She had walked the labyrinth, and in doing so, had found peace not in the destination, but in the journey. The labyrinth was timeless, as were the stories of those who walked it. And so, the journey continued, ever unfolding. Decades passed, and the world that Kale and Alara had touched had transformed into a vibrant, flourishing realm. The labyrinth was no longer just a physical or metaphorical place, it had become a guiding principle for all who sought knowledge, wisdom, and peace. The teachings had spread to every corner of the world, embraced by people of all cultures, backgrounds, and beliefs. The message was simple yet profound. The key to understanding the universe and oneself lay within, in the intricate labyrinth of the heart and mind. But even with the teachings flourishing, there were still those who felt lost, unsure of their place within the grand design. The labyrinth had become both a beacon and a challenge, offering enlightenment to some, while leaving others feeling adrift in its vastness. Among the many who sought guidance, a new generation of seekers emerged, children born from the legacy of Kale and Alara's teachings. These children were born with an innate understanding of the labyrinth's power. They saw the interconnectedness of all things, understood the balance between light and shadow, and knew that true mastery was not about control, but about harmony. The time had come for these young guardians to step forward. A girl named Lyra, with eyes as bright as the first dawn, felt the call. Her heart had always been drawn to the labyrinth, though she had never physically walked its corridors. She saw it in her dreams, in the shifting patterns of light and shadow that danced in her thoughts. Lyra knew her purpose lay within the labyrinth, and her destiny would soon unfold. One night, under the light of a full moon, Lyra stood on the edge of the same meadow where Alara had once stood, many years before. The wind whispered through the trees, as if calling her by name. Lyra had heard stories of Alara's journey, of Kale's teachings, and of the wisdom they had shared. But she felt there was something more she had to discover on her own. In the distance, she saw a faint, shimmering light. The labyrinth, she knew, was not just a metaphor anymore, it was a place she had to enter. The time had come for her to find the next key. With determination in her heart, Lyra stepped forward. As Lyra walked, the world around her seemed to shift. The path beneath her feet began to glow, and the air grew thick with anticipation. It was as though the very fabric of time and space was bending around her, guiding her deeper into the labyrinth. The entrance appeared before her, not as a door or a physical structure, but as a swirling, ever-changing vortex of light and shadow. It seemed to pulse with a rhythm, as if breathing in sync with her own heartbeat. Without hesitation, Lyra stepped forward, entering the labyrinth. Inside, the walls seemed to grow taller, stretching into infinity. The path ahead twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing, sometimes widening, like the threads of fate itself. Lyra could feel the presence of those who had walked the labyrinth before her, Kale, Alara, and countless others, each of their footprints woven into the very fabric of the labyrinth. She was not alone. As she continued deeper into the maze, Lyra felt the familiar tug of uncertainty. The labyrinth was not a simple path, it was a challenge, a trial of the spirit. There were moments when the way forward seemed impossible, when shadows loomed large and doubts crept into her mind. But each time she paused, she remembered the words of Alara: the labyrinth is not about finding the end. It's about discovering who you are along the way. Lyra smiled to herself, drawing strength from those words, and continued forward. With each step, she learned more about herself. Her fears faded, replaced by a deeper understanding of her own heart and purpose. Deep within the labyrinth, Lyra encountered other guardians, beings of light and shadow, each one a reflection of the labyrinth's many facets. These guardians were not like the ancient heroes of the past, but rather, they were manifestations of the labyrinth itself, embodying different qualities and lessons. One guardian, a figure cloaked in golden light, stepped forward and spoke in a voice that resonated with the very core of her being. "You seek the key," the guardian said. "But remember, the true key is not an object, it is the knowledge that you are already a part of the labyrinth. You have been walking its path all along, even when you didn't know it." Lyra nodded slowly, understanding. The labyrinth was not just a place, it was a part of her, a reflection of her own journey. And as the guardian spoke, Lyra realized that the key she sought was not something external. It was the wisdom she carried within her, the power of self-discovery and connection with others. Another guardian, this one a figure of shadow, appeared before her, and its voice was soft yet powerful. "Do not fear the darkness," the shadow said, "for it is through the darkness that we find the light. You must embrace both aspects of yourself to fully understand the labyrinth's teachings." Lyra bowed her head, accepting the truth of these words. She had always been afraid of the shadows, of the parts of herself that felt unworthy or broken. But now, she understood that it was through embracing those aspects that she could truly become whole. The guardians smiled, their forms fading into the labyrinth. Lyra was left standing in the heart of the maze, her heart open and clear. At the center of the labyrinth, Lyra found herself standing before a great, shimmering door. It was not locked, but it was heavy, as though it carried the weight of countless generations. This was the final trial, the moment when everything she had learned would come to fruition. As she approached the door, she reached for the key, not with her hands, but with her heart. She understood now that the key was not an object or a prize. It was the ability to embrace both light and darkness, to walk the path with understanding and grace. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, the door opening before her. And as she passed through, Lyra realized that she had not found the end of her journey, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one that would be written with the wisdom she had gained, and with the promise that the labyrinth would always be there, guiding those who were ready to walk its path. As Lyra stepped through the glowing door, she found herself standing in a vast, star-filled expanse. It was as though time itself had dissolved around her, leaving her suspended between moments, a place beyond the boundaries of space and time. This new realm felt both familiar and completely alien. There were no walls here, no paths to follow. It was a realm of infinite possibilities, a place where the labyrinth stretched infinitely in every direction. Each step she took seemed to ripple through the very fabric of reality, creating echoes that reverberated across the stars. In the distance, she could see the faintest outline of a figure, someone standing tall and resolute, their silhouette framed by the celestial glow. Lyra felt an undeniable pull toward them, as if this figure held the final piece of her puzzle. She moved toward the figure, her footsteps quiet in the vast emptiness. As she approached, the figure slowly turned to face her, revealing the face of a familiar yet distant presence. "Alara." "Alara?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of wonder and awe. Alara smiled, her face serene. "Yes, it is me. But I am also more than that." Lyra stood still, trying to comprehend the profound depth of Alara's words. You have come far, Lyra, Alara continued. You have walked through the labyrinth, learned its lessons, and discovered the truth about the key. But now, you must understand something deeper. The labyrinth does not end here. It is not a place, but a force and energy that shapes all things, even time itself. Lyra's heart raced. She had learned so much, and yet it felt as though this journey was just beginning. Alara, what is this place? Lyra asked, her voice filled with awe and curiosity. Where are we? This, Alara said, gesturing to the infinite expanse around them, is the labyrinth beyond time. It is the realm of creation, where all possibilities exist in perfect harmony. The labyrinth is a reflection of the cosmos itself, a living, breathing force that weaves the tapestry of reality. It exists beyond time, beyond space, and beyond the understanding of the mortal world. Lyra felt a deep sense of peace wash over her as she absorbed Alara's words. She had thought the labyrinth was a puzzle to solve, a path to walk, but now she understood that it was far more than that. The labyrinth was a cosmic force, shaping the universe and guiding those who sought its wisdom. There is one final truth you must understand, Lyra, Alara continued, her eyes glowing with the wisdom of the ages. The labyrinth exists in all things. It is within you, within me, within every living being. The key you sought was not an object, but a realization. The power to shape reality is within your own heart. It always has been. Lyra closed her eyes, her breath steady and deep. She understood now. The labyrinth was not just a place or a journey, it was a part of her, part of the very fabric of existence. Alara stepped closer, placing a hand on Lyra's shoulder. You are ready now, Lyra. You are ready to return to the world, to guide others along the path. The labyrinth will always be there for you, and now, you carry its wisdom within you. With Alara's blessing, Lyra felt herself begin to fade, as though she were being pulled back toward the realm of the living. She closed her eyes once more, and when she opened them again, she found herself standing once again in the meadow where her journey had begun. The moon was high in the sky, casting a gentle glow over the world. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the soft hum of the labyrinth's presence in the distance. Lyra took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the wisdom she had gained settle in her heart. The world was waiting. Lyra knew now that the labyrinth was not just a place, it was a guide, a force that would continue to shape her life and the lives of all those she encountered. She was no longer just a seeker. She was a guardian, a guide for others on their own journeys through the labyrinth of their lives. And as she walked forward into the world, she carried with her the key to understanding that the labyrinth was not just an external journey, but a journey of the heart, a journey that never truly ends. The labyrinth, after all, was within everyone. Years passed, and Lyra's teachings spread far and wide, touching the hearts of countless people. Her story became a legend, passed down through generations. But Lyra never saw herself as a legend. She was simply a guide, one who had walked the path before and was now showing others how to find their own way. The labyrinth continued to grow, shifting and changing as time went on. But the lessons remained the same. It was not the destination that mattered, it was the journey itself. And the understanding that the labyrinth was a reflection of the endless cycles of life, light, and shadow. And so, the key remained. It was the key to understanding the labyrinth within, the key to unlocking the mysteries of the heart and the universe. And as long as the labyrinth existed, its wisdom would continue to guide those who were ready to seek it. For the labyrinth was eternal. That's the end of today's story. See you.